Right, it is 9 o'clock. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Jerry Gilroy, and Sheehan with you every morning. We're here from 7:30 until 10 for the duration of our lockdown. And one of the things that we're doing is we're going county by county, and we're asking some people we respect and love to come forth and tell us who should be on that county's sporting Mount Rushmore. No better person than Diarmuid Lyng to do Wexford's for us. We're going to hear from Liam Griffin in a couple of minutes' time as well. But Diarmuid, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Jerry. How's it going?
A lot of people haven't slept very well the night before they've been asked to come on and do this. You slept like a baby, I hear.
Sure, I wish I could say that. And I didn't sleep like my baby either, because the two of us were up for half the night.
Oh,
so
no.
I couldn't let go of, do you know, when you're down and you're on social media, it's an amazing thing that happens. When I was on Twitter and I was responding and thinking and talking to people, and nothing was coming clearly. And then I was lying in bed and all of this poetic beauty started coming out of me about Wexford people. And it reminded me, when I was on Twitter talking about it, it gets into this like, no, it should be him. No, it should be him. And I had listened to Nathan talking about how the Mayo he'd be savaged for who he left off. And I realised it's just an absolute celebration of the people, of the great sporting people of Wexford. And it's a joy to do it, and a joy to get a chance to celebrate some of those players. So once that dawned on me, shortly before dawn, I I rested a little bit easier for the last couple of hours.
That's class. So it was kind of just before the dawn, when it's always darkest, the vision comes to you and you're like, I'm going to have the crack.
Well, I mean, you know, you could end up singing or anything. I just thought, here, just enjoy it. Yeah, who are they? Who are the great players? Like, what do they represent? The rules, like, what are the rules for a start? I mean, once Adrian picked Paddy O'Shea, the rules went out the window as far as I'm concerned. I think we just get a chance to look at some of the people who represented us, you know. Like, is there a Wexfordness in a way, and who are the people who represented that? So that's kind of what I was thinking about. Achievement, medals, that all comes into it. Like, it's there's so many influences in it, but it was it was quite a joy in the end, and so many different views from so many different people as well, that it was it was good to get that too.
So when you were a kid, what were the names, the local names? Because like in our house, we were big Wexford hurling fans, and the Rackards would have got mentioned, but Tony Doran would have been one of the archetypal hurlers of my youth, where I would have heard my dad when we were commentating in the back garden, or even my ma talking about, you know, just a force of nature, and somebody who was able to hold his own against all of the other teams around the country. And for whatever reason, Tony Doran was one of the absolute legends. I actually remember being held up to meet him one time, and you know, one of those times when your hand disappears into the hand of somebody else, which obviously is never going to happen again. But like, I remember Tony Doran's a man with big hands.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you have that, because you're a little bit older than I am, Ger, and I don't have that. And I realised that at about 4 o'clock this morning. I think I was like, Jeannie Mac, I don't even have Tony Doran in there. And I think it's because, like, I mean, I came up in the 80s, and George was really was that figure for me in the 80s. And when you talked about going back before that, you skipped the 70s and went straight to the 50s. I suppose 68 was probably a big thing, but you went straight to the 50s and to Nicky Rackard and the Rackards. They were the archetypal figure, as you talk about. Like, Nicky Rackard was Cullen's son, like, you know, that goes straight back into, once upon a time. Like, he was a story. He was barely a living creature to me. He was like just a legend, somebody who walked up to Owen Maka throwing a ball, a spear, and a shield ahead of him and catching it on the way. Like, that's who Nicky Rackard was. So he was who we grew up with, the mythical figure. But in the very real moment of it, I would say George was probably he was the real embodiment of it.
I mean, you've obviously got a very intense personal relationship with George O'Connor as well. That obviously, and this is your list, right? So there's that actually adds to. Are you putting George O'Connor on your Mount Rushmore?
I mean, for the moustache he rocked in the 80s, I feel like he should definitely get on it for that alone. But you know, I'm not, because Nicky Rackard has to go on it. Nicky Rackard just has to go on it. Right? He's a man mountain himself anyway. So Nicky Rackard, and I suppose George is similar. And it is my list, so I can just decide for myself. But I feel you have to represent the great sporting variety that we've had in some way. But Nicky Rackard, I mean, I wrote down some of the things. 17 years he played for. In 54. In the Leinster final, he scored 5-5. He went out in the Ireland semi-final and scored 7-7. I mean, who scores 7-7 in a game of hurling? Like,
I didn't know this.
7-7. Yeah, unbelievable stuff. So, I mean, 2 All-Irelands, 4 Leinsters, 1 league, and 1 Leinster football championship as well. So Nicky Rackard kind of is facing south. He's facing east on Mount Rushmore. The sun is going to rise on Nicky Rackard's face because the sun rose on Wexford hurling through Nicky Rackard. So he's sorted, I think. He's like, and I mean, you're talking about like Nick O'Donnell, Bobby Rackard, Art Foley, all of these greats from that team. Jim English, Damien Fitzhenry up to modern day, George O'Connor, Tony Doran. So many other players, but I do feel you have to represent the variety. So I went with Nicky Rackard as a stonewall cert. He was my chorus Staunton as Nathan had.
Okay, well, can we talk about some of George's teammates then? Because Damien Fitzhenry is obviously somebody who was an absolute sensation and...
unbelievable, Ger. Unbelievable. Jeannie Mac to have gone to have trained with Damien Fitzhenry. My God, the stuff that man could do in goal was just phenomenal. Like, people debate it, it was a great generation of goalkeepers, Davy Fitzgerald and Brendan, like Don Logue. There was great goalkeepers, but Damien Fitzhenry to me was like, I've an image actually. Shefflin ran through on goal in the 2007 Leinster final, I think, and I was marking him, and he had just eluded me. He was gone 50 yards away before I even knew that he wasn't right beside me. And my only job was to know where he was, like, and he was gone. I didn't know where he was. And I turned around, he was in 10 yards away from Fitzy. So I was sprinting back in. The ball went in. He caught it. He turned to hit it. I couldn't do anything. I was so far away. So I tried to slide tackle him and kick him as hard as I could at the same time to put him off and swipe the hurl across him as well, all in one movement, which I actually succeeded in doing. And as I was doing that, he struck the ball and I turned around to see the net shaking, I thought. And I just have this image of Fitzhenry suspended about a foot above the ground the whole way across the goal, the hurl outstretched and the ball just tipping the very, very corner of it. And I'd say we were 8 yards away from goal and Shefflin had a full belt on it. Fitzhenry was unbelievable.
I'd forgotten that you actually were teammates of his at the end of his career. He played for so long as well. He's another one who played for 15, 16 years.
Yeah, I played with Fitzy for 4 or 5 years, I'd say, Jar. I used to love playing with Fitzy, particularly when I was wing back, because he'd put the ball in your hand from anywhere. He just hit the ball like a bullet. Now, you wouldn't want to be with him at training. You'd be there in November and December at training, and you'd be doing the warm-up before the game, and everybody else would be kind of tapping back and forth. And you'd be driving the ball through you, and your hands would be Baltic cold, and the ball would be hitting your bones. It wouldn't even be hitting your skin. And but Fitzy, there was no let up in Fitzy. He was a link back to the likes of George. He was a link back to fellas who were like, that's how they carried on a regular basis. Like, they played league hurling in the winter. Like, they were tough men. Like, and he was kind of telling the young upstart townie, this is how it's done. You get tough early, and it was a good lesson.
Right, well, I'm going to ask you in a minute whether or not he's going to make it, but I'm delighted to say we've got Liam Griffin on the line with us this morning as well. Liam, good morning to you. How are you doing?
Good morning, folks. How are you?
Well, I should tell you where Diarmuid started, right? He says that Nicky Rackard is going to be east-facing, the sun is going to rise, and the first thing that the sun will pick on Wexford's Mt Rushmore is the face of Nicky Rackard every day, because the sun rose in Wexford hurling when Nicky Rackard rose, and so he is an unimpeachable on Wexford's Mt Rushmore. Would you agree with that?
I would, and I'd agree with he should be in the top of one of the top people on hurling in Mount Rushmore as well, because don't forget where he came from. He came from a county that was not strong in hurling, that was trying to emerge. And he went to Kieran's in Kilkenny, and in fairness, he learned a lot of his hurling at Kieran's. And, you know, he led Wexford when we hadn't fields of barley. I can tell you we had fairly barren fields in hurling. And he won a Leinster medal in 1940, centre field, playing for Wexford junior. And, he carried on through a lot of thick and thin and through a lot of heartaches with Wexford, and eventually put his flag on top of the mountain for us. And his two brothers as well in the same house came out with him, and the two of them wound up in the team of the century, except to drop Nicky, which is a disgrace later on off the team of the century, which was a crazy thing to happen. But however, we took the insult, and I suppose the family did as well. And that's it. But he's the main man, and he was the man who drove Wexford, and he's the man who inspired me, and that team of the 50s would have inspired me as well. So number one for sure in County Wexford.
Lovely story, Liam. It was Billy wrote No Hurling at the Dairy Door, a beautiful book about their life growing up. And he said that Nicky Rackard came in one morning, and in on the side of one of the barn buildings into the cement was carved, or into the stone was carved, JK 98. I mean, John Kelly. 98. And so he put Nicky Rackard 56 beside it, and that's that links straight back to 1798, which is something we definitely value that in Wexford, you know.
Well, and Kelly, the boy from Killam, was supposed to be born in that house, in fairness. But the other thing about it is this, that when he went to Cairns, he was starring for Cairns, and his photograph appeared on one of the national papers. But Bobby and Billy were hurling out in the yard, and the mother called him in and put the Independent down in front of them, or whatever paper it was, and showed them Nicky's photograph with great pride, because that would be very unusual. And the two boys then, that's his two brothers who he seriously influenced, and they really wanted to be like that as well. So, you brought three big men, over 6'2", 6'3", out of the same house. But the man that led him out of that house was Nicky Rackard, and therefore led the rest of the people as well to follow him from Rathnewer and Clabon and all the various areas. So, without a question, he has to go there as number one.
Go on, sorry.
Liam, sorry, Liam. What was the thought process behind not including Nicky Rackard in that team of the Millennium? Was it a complete aberration? Was it met with outrage at the time?
No, it was a GA 3-card trick. Look, they took two people off the team this century that never played a game. But you can imagine the insult that was. And Nicky Rackard was taken off. Now, Nicky Rackard, you can say what you like about Christy Ring, and he was an absolutely magnificent hurler. I'm not taken from him. I'm not taken from any of the great Kilkenny players, Lowry Marr or anybody else. But where Nicky Rackard had come from, it's absolutely an aberration to think they could take him off of that. And I remember being incensed when I saw it, to be honest. But look at, that's the way it works, and that's what happened, and we move on. That's it. But we know where he is, and we know where he came from, and we know what he did, and that's all that matters to me and to the people of Wexford, I imagine.
Can you tell us about what kind of a player he was? Because obviously most of us never actually got the opportunity to see him. So, go on.
I did see him. I saw him at the very end of his days, and I was lucky to be on a Wexford team one time that he was involved with, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and that was like the hand of God touching you. You know what I mean? He was just, look, he was a fantastic man. Like, his presence was just unbelievable. To see him standing in a dressing room, like, you wouldn't be worried about going out, you'd be just looking at him. That's a fact. He was a gentleman as well. Now, he had his problems when he wasn't a gentleman, when he drink taken, like most people, like a lot of people. And that was such a tragedy. And he died as a young man. And that was so tragic that he should die as a young man. But I saw him playing a game against Kilkenny. I don't know what kind of a game it was. I'm not even sure. It was in Belfield and Enniscorthy. And Wexford were losing by about, I think it was 5 or 6 points. And he got 3 goals in about the last, I don't know. I just can't recall. But I remember him just going out to the middle of the field and getting the ball and coming down the middle and everybody hopping off him. You know, just that time, full-backs hadn't the great silken skills and they weren't deft, crafty little hurlers. They'd meet you up and hop off you, which we all learned to take in our time. But just he stood up like a I don't know, he was a giant of a man, and that's it. And Cú Chulainn song, that song that's written about him, a poem that Tom Williams wrote, has to be one of the most beautiful GAA poems of all time. And his name is not even mentioned. We saw you on September fields and lightning was the drive. You were the one, Cú Chulainn son, in 1955.
Oh,
and he was. And he was.
Liam, do you remember in the 70s, because I was reading about it last night, and it was talking about how when he began to talk about it maybe a little bit more openly, the alcoholism and the effect that had on his life, and that it was a kind of a pioneering thing at the time, that it wasn't something that was done in Irish society. Now, I don't remember, but a taboo, he broke a taboo, like that he had that greater leadership than just on the field.
He came out and he said it himself. But, you know, that time everything was pushed under the closet, I'm sure. But the great thing about him, you know, that he was an inspiration after that. And he went on to do great work with alcoholics and so forth. But I'm just going to say this, and I'm not saying this to be smart. I'm saying this because I mean it so sincerely. After the Ireland final, when we won it, we put the cup in the middle of the floor, and the next morning after the All-Ireland. And my view was he'd such an influence on me and what his life was. We got her stood around the cup and said a few prayers as well, and I'm not ashamed to say that, I can tell you. And I said, and I meant it because I thought about it from the previous months and weeks before we ever did, that if any one of you become an alcoholic, like Nicky Rackard, he was one of the greatest things. Hero worship is dangerous. And from here out this story, your lives will change forever. And Nicky's life was spoiled by the hero worship that he achieved. And that's such an unintended consequence, but that's the truth, and that's what happens. And that's what happened, Nicky.
He went public in a series of interviews with the Irish press. We were just, I think the Wexford People actually republished them recently enough, and it was fascinating stuff. And Diarmuid, as you say, nobody really spoke about it at the time, but he ended up working with Alcoholics Anonymous and travelling the country. And so, you know, so obviously did feel like he was giving back, and again, using his fame and his hero worship as something to help people to try and shake the plague that alcoholism is in so many people's lives. Before you joined us, Liam, Diarmuid was talking about Damien Fitzhenry, and I don't know, Diarmuid, are you going to put Damien Fitzhenry, is he next on your list, or is there somebody from that 96 team on your list?
No. Well, I couldn't. Damien Fitzhenry was, I suppose, the greatest goalkeeper I ever saw, and I had a cousin who played in goal for Wexford, a brilliant goalkeeper before Damien, Pat Nolan from Oilgate, and he won a couple of All-Ireland medals and played in 4 or 5 All-Ireland finals. He was a magnificent goalkeeper as well, and he wasn't very flamboyant. But Damien Fitzhenry, like what can you say about Damien Fitzhenry? I think I said something about him one time, that Damien Fitzhenry had such a mental fortitude and strength. Damien Fitzhenry believed completely in himself. And I said about him before, and I repeat it, that he often sat in bed at night time even wondering why any goal got by him. And that's not an arrogance. I don't think Fitzy ever believed that he wasn't giving out the damn to himself afterwards for letting in any goal. That never mind some spectacular saves. Any goal. He wouldn't allow any goal to go in there. David Welch of the Sunday Times was down with us in before 1995, I think it was. And we had Damien lined up, but we had done a new kind of goalkeeping drills whereby we called numbers, and there was we line guys across in front of the goal coming from every side, and you were calling the number. Now, I'm telling you, I wouldn't have stood in the goal for it, because if you didn't get the number caller right, and that was good for his mental dexterity as well, if you didn't get their numbers right, and we could call 1, 11, 12, 4, 6, coming at him in bullets. And I'm telling you, David Welch came to me and said, holy God, I never saw anything like that, and he wrote about it afterwards. And that's what he was like. He was just an incredible goalkeeper, and no big show about the saves he made. No big show, and he was able to forget something. If it went into the back of the net, he had the ability to just leave it behind him and just get on with it, and he was just magnificent. I went down to him, this is funny, I went down to him at the Ireland semi-final or something, and I don't know what I said, I was talking about the puck out, and I said something, he said to me, no, maybe it was Leinster's final line, something like, just a big crowd, isn't there? I don't know. I just like, he's in a big field somewhere on his own. Just past the column. It's a big crowd, isn't it? You know, just so the man was so in the moment. Unbelievable. I would think he's the greatest goalkeeper I ever saw. And I saw Ali as well, and I saw a lot of great goalkeepers, but he's the number one for me as well on the goalkeeping side. Have to be.
Yeah, it's not. I don't have him, Ger, because it's not hurling only Mount Rushmore. Unfortunately, he definitely would. I'd have to give a couple of honourable mentions. I mean, Sean O'Kennedy, before my time, don't know anything really about the man, but they won 4 All-Irelands back-to-back football, and he captained 3 of them, so he's obviously a pretty serious contender. Kate Kelly, 9 Camogie, 9 All-Stars, 4 All-Irelands. I mean, changed the way when Camogie was going through its biggest change, she was ahead of that change all the time. Phenomenal Camogie player. Definitely the best I've seen. But the second one for me is moving over to football, and again, the impact on people and the way the game is played, and walking away from grounds, and sincerely meaning this, walking away from grounds. Wexford Park one day in particular, after a game against, I think maybe Offaly, the Meath game up in Carlow, Galway 4-4. Matty Ford, sometimes I just felt grateful walking out of a stadium that I actually got to witness him doing his thing at the height of his game. I just thought, you'd feel lucky, like you'd feel lucky to have seen him. And they didn't win All Irelands, but at a time when there was a huge shift back towards Wexford football, and at times at the cost of the hurling, it felt for us. But Matty Ford was definitely the best footballer for me in the country at a time. And coming from Wexford and coming from a place where there was no investment in football really when he was coming along, he'd have to be in there for the second GA one for me.
Okay, right. That's a big call. The hurlers are going to be, I don't know if they're going to be up in arms, but they're going to be certainly a point of debate long into the night.
Yes, of course they'll be up in arms, but that's fine, Ger. That's fine.
Yeah, of course it is. You were raised in a house that played football though as well. Like obviously your brother played for Wexford, so you actually have an appreciation. You were a dual purpose house.
I don't know. He was kind of sneaking out and playing football. We always thought he'd play hurling, or once he went off to play soccer in England, and he came back and he went straight into the Wexford hurling panel with John Myler. Actually, even though he'd missed like the previous 5 years, hadn't lifted a hurling 5 years, and he was on the hurling panel within a couple of months. But that was Kieran's extraordinary talent. The football was obviously just closer to the soccer in terms of the nature of the game, and Wexford were on a serious rise at the time, or just coming into a rise, but actually they hadn't hit it yet on the field. But Red Barry and David Murphy and Matty, Colin Morris, all those fellas, they had a lovely dynamic. They had a lovely dynamic as a group. They were great friends. They were involved in each other's lives in a way that I was very envious of, actually, and told them so as a hurler, because at the time we didn't have that maybe strong dynamic. So I think once you have a totem, once you have somebody who you can kind of build that around, and Matty Ford definitely had that, or definitely was that. Kieran responded to the football and just an awful lot better, and went down that road. But yeah, we always thought he'd come back to the hurling. We thought he'd see sense and come back and play hurling, but it never happened in the end.
It's like I think he's always held up as Wexford's greatest ever footballer, Diarmuid, and I'd be keen to just tap into a little bit more of what you said previous to him about Sean O'Kennedy, and I'd be keen to hear what you have to say as well, Liam, just in terms of like when we hear about dual players, we always associate it with Cork or Galway and things like that. We don't necessarily associate Wexford with anybody who was great historically and winning All Irelands in both. But I think O'Kennedy has medals in both hurling and football, and also the great thing that kind of sticks out from history is that Wexford 4 in a row team, which we literally know nothing about, because like I think as far back, if you look outside of Kerry and Dublin for teams who've won consecutively, you think of Galway in the 60s perhaps, but that Wexford team is like an alien idea at this point, 100 years on. Like O'Kennedy, is he a legend in Wexford, or is he a bit more of a cult figure when it comes to conversations around GAA?
Well, he was more of a legend in my part of the world for a long, long time, until it's faded now, because the captain of the team that won it in 1918 was Jim Byrne. He was a teacher in Kilran, and he was from Carlow originally. But Sean O'Kennedy would have been a part of Wexford folklore. I played a lot of football in colleges, won Munster football championships, beaten a lot in semi-finals, and I love football, and I always enjoyed football. The problem with Wexford would have been probably that if you were pro hurling, you were anti-football, and if you were pro football, you were anti-hurling, which is a load of nonsense. But people just go on with it all the time, and it's just cracked. I in favour of both in every club. But Sean O'Kennedy certainly deserves to be considered, but he's faded in history, and I suppose that's the reason why. Matty Ford was a magnificent footballer. My great memory of Matty Ford was the Wexford played Sligo in Wexford Park, and he went over to one sideline and put the ball over the bar with his right foot, and he went over to the far side. Now, I don't know if it was his left foot, but he put it over the bar. The goalkeeper kicked it away from him, and it went over the line of the far side. He went across and just put that over the bar. Like, he was the same as Maurice Fitzgerald. Like, he was a Maurice Fitzgerald, and Maurice Fitzgerald is a magnificent footballer. And that was a great Wexford football team, and there's some great players on it. And they got to an All-Ireland semi-final, and only for Matty went off at half-time, they've won that, and they've got to an All-Ireland final, in my opinion. They missed him in the second half and made a great comeback. So, we've had some great footballers. Willie Goodison played centre-back for Wexford, was a fantastic footballer in his time. Nicky Rackard, won a Leinster, well, he might have won a Railway Cup medal, but he played for Wexford's 15 footballers, and he played for Leinster in football. And that's something that's faded because of the hurling, but he did. But at that time it was easier to do it because everything was knockout. So, look, we've had some great footballers, and I couldn't argue with Diarmuid on Matty Ford. I think... he was poetry in motion. He beat us in a bloody county semi-final with 8 points and playing hurling, so that makes me sick. However,
I didn't know he was a great hurler as well.
He was an absolutely brilliant hurler, and he could point the ball from 70 and 80 yards without looking at it. He was a super hurler. If he'd have concentrated on hurling, he would have been one of the all-time greats in hurling as well. I'm convinced of it. So, he deserves it, and look, as Diarmuid said, he was poetry in motion on the football field, and for a big man, he looked fantastic. If we had 15 of them, it'd be brilliant.
Right.
By the way, I believe Wexford could contest the 2 Leinster finals on the same day if we got our head around it in hurling and football. But anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Oh, we can come back to that at some point later on. We've got plenty of time, Liam, for over the next couple of months to be speculating about what the future might look like.
Yeah, we sure have.
Diarmuid, who's next?
I'm going to skip to the sun setting, actually, and I'm going to leave number 3 to Liam Griffin, I think, because this is where it turns into a minefield. I will go with into the facing a little bit more.
This is what's known as a suicide pass.
I mean, look, we'll go through and see. I could decide if there's any one of the 7 or 8 here, but definitely for me, in terms of the sun setting in the west, there's a thing, I suppose, ritualistically thinking that when the sun sets, that it's not like the end of something, but the beginning of something new. And Billy Walsh, for me, represents something that is in the Wexford character, in his sense of himself based on where he's from, a new way, a new mindset, and a new sense of himself, and a certainty, and an organisation, and a skill, and an ability to observe that I think is something that I'd love to bring forward, and I'd love for that to be a kind of a sense of Wexfordness that maybe that's changed from what it was. I don't know about that, but that's how I feel about it anyway. And Billy Walsh to me is I mean, I have such pride when I see him on the international stage, and when he was fighting his great fight with Ireland, and when he seemed to be definitely treated in a way that wasn't befitting of a man who had contributed so much. He shook it off so lightly, I felt. His skill as a boxer was one thing. I mean, Jim O'Sullivan won, I think, maybe 9 or 10 All-Irelands, but I think it was Billy went to the Olympics. So he as a boxer, he obviously cut it himself. But as a coach, he represents something exceptionally strong and certain, but is very, very rooted in who he is and where he's from. And he's a fella who I'd put up on Mt Rushmore in Wexford to say this is who we can be as well,
Okay, right. I mean, it's not in any way, I don't think it's controversial at all because of his track record in the ring and outside the ring. Pardon me. And one of the few times where somebody from boxing ends up leading the main news when it ends up in that contract dispute, that's a sign of just the impact that he'd had. Right. So this leaves us with a lot of people desperately trying to be the number 4 on the list.
Well, before I throw that one over to Liam, that fine hospital pass over to Liam, I will say, I mean, horse racing, Jim Bolger and Aidan O'Brien, horse trainers, I don't know, sports people, yeah, I suppose they are in some respects, but you're managing an animal who does something as opposed to you're actually doing something yourself. Jamie Codd. When I saw Jamie Codd doing the interview, he had a great win last year, and he did an interview on the television. And when I looked at him and I saw his bareness and his openness and his strength, I thought there's there's a great Wexford man, like Jamie Codd, great the jockey, great Wexford man. My own granduncle Dick Lyng won 9 All-Irelands, All-Ireland handball championships for Wexford, and a world championship in 1970. Was bet, I think, on his 40th birthday, but by a 20-year-old Duxie Welsh. And he brought a world championship, the first to Ireland, with Seamus Buggy in 1970. So well, when he's my uncle, I can definitely stick him in there somewhere. In rugby terms, Gordon Darcy, Tyke Furlong. I haven't really been watching a huge amount of rugby over the last few years. I believe Tyke Furlong is probably the best in his position in the world, or was for a little while. Anybody who gets to that level, sure, Jeannie Mac, they have to be in consideration. And then Grania Murphy for swimming, who has European medals. So Liam, yeah, best of luck with that one. Number 4 for me is Billy Walsh, and maybe Liam has other ones too that I definitely would like to hear as well.
Yeah, well, the Bull Ryan was a great handballer before your granduncle, and he won All-Irelands all around him. He actually toured with the Wexford team in '56 to America as well, but they weren't. America wasn't a place they were playing handball between Ireland and America until much later. But he was a magnificent handballer. I saw him playing a fellow called Victor Sherlock, who was a great Cavan footballer in Wexford one time. But the Bull Ryan was the main man in Wexford handball for a long number of years as well. So, I can't argue with any of the names you put up. Look at Billy Welsh. Billy Welsh is a good friend of mine, I'd like to think, and I think the way he was treated in boxing was beyond belief, but we won't even go near there. But we brought Billy in to talk to the Wexford hurling team at the very start, and we brought in John Joe Doyle, a great runner, and John Joe was a veteran at that time. And we brought in several different fellas from different sports to exchange ideas with the players, and Billy was brilliant, and Billy made a comment that night which I thought was just fantastic. He said he got fed up playing hurling and football because he was dependent on too many other fellas, and they were half pissed some of the time, and it wasn't good enough for him. So he wanted to go and make something of himself, and then he said he concentrated in the boxing, and he was a great servant of the Fight Harriers and Sarsfields as well. So what would you say? I couldn't say anything against Billy, but sort of go on from there. I really at a loss. I mean, you mentioned Jim Bolger. Jim Bolger, don't forget, in terms of horse racing, he started from scratch and he built up an entire fantastic setup, and one first Wexford man one of the first Irish guys. Well, he wasn't, Vincent O'Brien was, but he won a derby, and that was as a Wexford man, and he came from scratch in racing. So Aidan O'Brien certainly is magnificent as well, and Aidan O'Brien went into Coolmore, but what he's done and what his family has done is just beyond belief. As a family, they'd have to come right up there at the top. So as a number 4, I actually don't know who the hell to pick, and that's a fact. I'd be going for George probably, because George is iconic, and look, he nearly broke my neck.
I'm happy with George to go in there for sure.
Yeah, but look, I don't want to be all GA either. I can see where we're coming from, but we've one hurler in there. What about Bobby Rackard? For God's sake, Bobby Rackard is an incredible hurler as well, and Mark Christie ring and did very well in him. So, look, I'm not sure who I go for 4. I'm not sure. I just can't even think straight. No. Right this minute. There's so many names going around my head.
If I was picking a number 4 now, and I know going back in time and all the greats of the different sports is one thing, but another fella who definitely, when I saw him playing, and he played at the top of his game, but when he played in particular for Ireland, and he was Player of the Year twice, he is another fella who emitted all that I would like to see, and all that I feel is positive about the Wexford character and the Wexford nature would be Kevin Doyle. Soccer player. I just thought he had an honesty, a bare, open honesty and commitment to what he was doing without any ego that always I felt was very admirable. So I'd have no problem sticking Kevin Doyle in.
And Kevin Doyle's a gentleman as well, and he was always a good guy. But I just say, we're forgetting a fella called Jem Roach. I know he was knocked out early on, but he fought for a world heavyweight title, and he was the man who trained the Wexford 1914, that team. He trained that 4-in-a-row team. And don't forget as well, it was a fella I didn't know until Jim Gavin sent it to me, a fella called Jim Rossiter, or was it Jim Rossiter, who he sent a picture of him to me with a ring around him. He was on the 14 team and meant to was killed in the Battle of the Somme or somewhere like that, which, God love him, as well. He's a Rossiter, and he's from Wexford, and he won all of the medal, and he was killed in the First World War. So. And by the way, there was a slight on Wexford, by the way, which we must manage that slight. they maintained there was a war on around Kerry, but there was a war on when Wexford were as well. We were part for the Redmondites, and a lot of Wexford players had gone to war, so they can check off at themselves. They were 4 in a row, and they were fairly won, and we were the best team in the land at the time.
Is that what you're saying to Kerry, Owen?
Exactly.
I was there.
We put up with a lot of stuff from Kerry in this show, Liam, but you're dead right. Any chance we get to do them over, we absolutely will. So look, we can't have a 3-faced Mount Rushmore. Everybody will be wondering what the hell's going on. So in the running, let me narrow it down to a short list here. Kevin Doyle is definitely in the running. George O'Connor is definitely in the running. Diarmuid, we've nobody from that 96 team as it stands, and. Who else? Who else are we going? Is Tyke Furlong in the running? Are we down to 3? Is it?
You could give an honourable mention to the manager of that 1996 team as well.
No,
I know it'll be difficult. I know it'll be difficult when he's on the line. But
I look in the mirror. I look in the mirror every day, and I know where I know my position in sport, and that's a fact. I didn't do it, and that's all there's to it. And I never ever thought otherwise. Managers don't win matches. Managers don't win matches. If the players are not good enough, they won't win it. If the players are not good enough, they can't win it. And that's it.
Sometimes, though, as a player, you need to be reminded of who you are, and I think that's what you brought. 1996, like you're reminded Wexford people of who they were, and we've held on to that. So I think like anybody who has that kind of an impact on a county like that, that's a serious. Worthy of a mention at least.
Yes, well look, his line is gone, so we can be nice about it now while we're getting him back up. He was absolutely in consideration for this, 100%. Like no ifs, ands or buts, he has to be, because again, for anybody who ends a famine or who makes a breakthrough first, I think your point about the sun rising on Nicky Rackard is excellent. But we need a fourth side of this mountain, Diarmuid, so we're going to have to pick somebody.
Yeah, I'd be definitely willing to go off into. I'd be willing to go with Kevin Doyle. I just think I admire everything about how he went about his business, and I know that Tyke Furlong, I know that all of these other great sports people, and that's what they were, just great sports people and great people to represent their area, and did so in a certain way, and I love that about them. I suppose I was looking at a bit of soccer at the time with Kevin Doyle, and I thought, Jeannie Mac, like there's an Irish international from just up the road in Adamstown with, I suppose I felt with good GA blood in him, so I felt I knew him, you know. I feel that with GA players, I suppose, and I got to know Stephen Hunt afterwards, who moved down to Wexford, and he carried that same thing, and all it is just identifying something and recognising something. I mean, if I met, I don't know, like Eric Cantona, who I actually did meet one time in Marseille, strangely enough, he's from a different world to me. But Kevin Doyle was just one of us, you know. And when he was on the international stage, I just thought he carried himself so well. So I know we're sacrificing a huge amount of fellas, and in some ways the GA fraternity, I'm not sure how they're going to be about me picking a soccer player for the fourth one, but Kevin Doyle was a great servant to Wexford, so I'd happily go with Kevin.
Nicky Rackard, Matty Ford, Kevin Doyle and Billy Walsh are Diarmuid's 4 on the Mount Rushmore.
Well, I'm going to say something now if I can.
Go for it.
From my perspective, I know Kevin Doyle, and he was a gentleman and he was a great player. I have to say, like, you know, from my point of view, if you want to pick, and now I'm a relation of his, so that might be biased, and you can factor that into it. But George O'Connor, 17 summers in purple and gold. I mean, and like what he gave for Wexford, I would say he would represent all of the guys in '96. We had some magnificent players on that Wexford team that had soldiers for so long, but George would have never been got a penny and never backed off. And he never would yield, as it says on the poem about him. But from my point of view, like 17 summers in purple and gold and never win anything. And myself and George had a pact that the All-Ireland final would be his last game of hurling. And because he'd nothing left to prove and nothing else was going to happen after that was going to be difficult. If ever he pulled a wrong stroke afterwards, he would never be forgiven. And look, he was some man. And I don't know how much more you have to prove yourself. But as regards hardship, sacrifice, you know, and still keep a job down and do it, I would say that I don't think you'd be wrong and George would represent that team of the 1996 and all the hurlers that had gone between the 70s and right through. So I would say that it'd be very, very, very hard to leave George out of that list if we're
okay,
going
George, let's throw out the fear of bias. Let's not worry about the broadness or anything else. I'm with George O'Connor as well. I mean,
Okay.
what a man, like, what a man to jump, what a man to catch a ball, what a man off the field, what a man in terms of generosity of spirit with the young people of Wexford, with young players, with club people, with GA people, sports people from all over the country. Just what a man. But the moustache has to be in there.
Peak 90s moustache. So let me recap then. The four are Nicky Rackard, Matty Ford, George O'Connor and Billy Walsh. And
it's a fine mount.
Everybody's agreed.
I fully back Billy Walsh because Billy Walsh was such a fantastic guy as well. We don't need to go over it again, but Billy Walsh certainly stellar kind of a guy. So I've no problem with Billy Walsh from that point. But you could pick four more as well. You could pick another four. We all know that.
But you can't, because there's only four.
Exactly, that's the thing, and that's why it's so good. I've got a question for you, Liam. Where in the county is this Mount Rushmore located exactly? Whereabouts in Wexford is the Wexford Sports Mount Rushmore?
And the top of the black stairs, so the Kilkenny fellas can see it as well.
Perfect.
And Blackstairs men who saw you
There's
then.
all of them still speak of you and pride, and Norman's Green where you have been to tell of what they saw. Anyway, go on, Diarmuid, let's finish it.